Recently, there's been a lot of interest in ADUs in the GTA. And one of the fundamental questions whenever I talk to clients about ADUs and financing is end value, the as complete value. And so I thought I would invite my good friend, David Wenger from Ridgepoint Appraisals to join me on today's call. And I'm going to ask him a point blank question. Does an ADU increase the value of your home? David, welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
David, before we answer that question, maybe you can do a brief introduction, what it is that you do as an appraiser and what methodology do you use to do your job?
As an appraiser, we're trying to figure out, at the end of the day, what the value of a property is. And there's several different methods that we use. There's the direct comparison approach, there's the cost approach, and there's the income approach. In the residential world, I would say the main way to figure out value is through the comparison approach. That's where we're looking at sales in the market that have happened, and we're trying to find the exact same property that the subject is. So,
Right.
and then you make adjustments for differences and whatnot, and you try to figure out what it is. And
Oh.
so in terms of that, I do it for financing, I'll do it for matrimonial, I'll do it for capital gains. There's different things that you can do appraisals for.
And let me ask you, I think there's an important question to be asked here. Is an appraised value the same thing as the market value?
An appraised value is basically our opinion of what it should sell for in the market, right?
Right.
So we try to reflect as good as we can what that sale price might be.
And that matters in my world when I do mortgage financing, especially as it relates to ADUs. This conversation comes up because a borrower may have a certain budget to add an ADU. And we should clarify, ADU means it could be a garden suite, a laneway house, anything else.
House.
Coach house. Yeah. So there's a certain budget for construction. And so let's say the budget is $750,000. Just because you spend $750,000 on an ADU, will it necessarily add $750,000 to the value of your home? And so I'd like to narrow in on this conversation a little bit more.
Sure.
In your experience with ADUs, what type of challenges do you have? I mean, you mentioned those three approaches that you take. Not every house in Toronto has a laneway suite. So how do you do that job?
Like I said before, we're always using like the direct comparison approach is one of the most important methods. Cost, it's not something that we rely upon. So the cost approach is basically building the value based on its components. So the house would be, 250,000, let's say, and then the land would be 750,000, then your landscaping, and you're adding it all up. But in all reality, that's not how the market works.
Right.
People don't go and look at the landscaping and try to determine, oh, I'll pay this much for the landscaping. They look at the entire package, and then they look at other houses in the market, which is basically the comparison. So in the terms of like an ADU, the limitations are there's not too many of them out there, right? Just like I did a search recently, and I think there's maybe 3 to 5 that have happened this year so far, which is actually pretty good. And one of the limitations too is that it's really hard to find them. You have to know what you're doing to actually find these comparables. Yeah. So if you could find something in the area that's close to your house, that's great. You're already off to the park. You know what I mean? And because that actually gives you an idea of how much a house with an ADU would be worth. The other method that we use is what's called the paired sales analysis.
Okay.
And that's when you're taking two very similar sales. One has an ADU and one doesn't. And then you might make, small adjustments. And like, let's say one just has a little bit more square footage. So you're just adjusting for that. And whatever that leftover amount is, should tell you how much the ADUs were, right? So that actually helps us to determine the adjustment that you would make between a house that doesn't have an ADU and does have an ADU. So that is actually the best method. And if you can find that information, That's the way you want to approach it.
There are different applications to the usefulness of an appraisal and what it's being used for. So one could be to prepare the home for sale.
Mm-hmm.
But inevitably, it's going to come back to the mortgage lender. So if there is construction financing involved, whether it's the actual construction financing itself or the takeout mortgage once the construction is done, does the bank or lender give you instruction on what methodology you can use?
They won't tell me the methodology to use, but they may actually have limitations on how I approach the appraisal of the. So sometimes they'll say don't include the coach house, right? And
right.
so right there's a big chunk of value that's gone for that owner, and that kind of comes from they treat it similarly with acreages, where they say don't include outbuildings, or they say limit the size of the acreage to 10 acres,
Right.
even though it's like 20 acres or 50 acres. These are things that the banks have been doing for a while.
Right.
But in terms of that, if we say that there's no ADU on the property, it's gonna affect the value for sure.
Right. And I think from my experience, and for anybody that's watching this who's interested in an ADU, that's something to keep in mind. And that's a major discussion point, because I've had exits on certain projects where the bank goes in and says, okay, do the appraisal without the ADU. Another will say, don't do the ADU, just add the square footage to the existing square footage of the home. And then another will say, well, no, look strictly at comparable to find another ADU and compare it apples to apples. Maybe let's pull it back to a more practical question. Based on what you see in the marketplace, and you mentioned 5 sales that have happened so far in 2025, does an ADU actually add value to a home in Toronto?
For sure. Yeah, it totally does.
Straight up. That's reassuring. I'm sure a lot of people watching this will be reassured to hear you say that. That was what they were after.
There's definite value to that. I mean, a 2-bedroom can get a really good rent, right? So that rent will help you pay for that mortgage. And or you could put a family member could live there, so it gives you. I mean, it doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody, right? Not everybody wants to have a house in their backyard, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't provide value for somebody. And the market reflects that. The market said it's worth something, and it's worth more than it would be without.
That's really the question that matters for a lot of the community that are really engaged in the ADU discussion. Is this going to add value? Now, some people do it because of functional reasons, to add the additional unit, the additional rent, have family living in the back. But there is an economic or business consideration here. If someone who's planning an ADU and would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can email me at info@Ridgepoint Appraisals .com.
Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you found some value in today's discussion. David has been a great partner of mine in helping to determine the value of different projects. I highly recommend his service. So if you have any questions or concerns, reach out anytime. Till next time, bye for now. Thanks so much, David.
Thanks. Have a good day.